PhD in food science, you got to go make some money, you know? So I did. I got a job with Quaker Oats back in the old days when they weren't part of PepsiCo. That was my first job. It was a good job. Met a lot of people there. Got a very good grounding there in the food world, food industry. Then I went to Anheuser-Busch down in St. Louis, and then back up to Chicago to Keebler, and Keebler was bought by Kellogg about midway through my time there. So I spent about half my career at the bench and about half my career in management. So kind of know both sides of it. I was lucky because I was able to do a lot of different things. At Quaker Oats, I worked in a lot of frozen products, frozen microwavable sandwiches, which is bakery shell with meat and cheese and meat and sauces inside those shells. And so I got a lot of experience with meat, vegetables, cheese, dairy, bakery products, sauces, a lot of work with starches there. And that's kind of set me up for my job in Anheuser-Busch, where I worked with dairy and non-dairy products, sour creams and salad dressings, whipped toppings, coffee whiteners, those types of things, using a lot of the functional ingredients like hydrocolloids. And then that set me up for my job at Keebler, where I became an elf. And really I was an elf most of my career, to be honest. I worked at Keebler. I started at the bench, and about 3 years into it, I became a manager there. And I was a manager through the time that Kellogg owned us as well. And so there, at Anheuser-Busch, I worked in refrigerated. At Keebler, I worked in shelf stable. So I was able to do a lot of different things. I worked in frozen, refrigerated, and shelf stable products, bakery, dairy, vegetables, meats. And the reason I tell you that is I think it's a nice thing to be able to learn new technologies and new things throughout your career. I always tell people it's good to start with a big company and ultimately move to a smaller mid-sized company later on, because you get such a great grounding with a big company that has a presence in the grocery store all over the country and all over the map, so to speak. And so they tell you a lot about branding, about the business of food, because the technology is important, but the business is important too. And you have to be both. I always said I'm a businessman first and a food technologist second. But anyway, and it doesn't matter whether you're working as a scholar in a university or whether you're working for a company. You really have to have a lot of the same skills. And we'll talk about some of those skills in a minute. So I had a lot of prepared slides for classes that I taught, and I took some bits and pieces from different things. And I wanted to just mention this. This is something I was looking at. It's the definition of food science. It says it's the branch of manufacturing that starts from raw animal, vegetable, or marine materials and transforms them into intermediate foodstuff or edible products through the application of, and get this, labor, machinery, energy, and scientific knowledge. And I thought, well, that's pretty darn good, because that's a lot of it. You really need to understand the labor and the machinery and the energy you have to put into it, along with the food science. So, I mean, your job, I've always said half of your job as a food scientist is not making people sick. So half your job is making sure you know how to make that food and put it in whatever distribution chain you're in, whether it's frozen, refrigerated, or shelf stable, and make sure that when people eat it, they don't get sick or die, as some of the meat people have done. We can talk about that all day. But hurdle technologies are important. How you understand water and water activity and the water in your food. It's always the most important piece of the food scientist's toolkit, is how you deal with water. Whether in a Keebler cookie product, I don't know if you guys know Keebler brand all that well. They own Mother's. You probably know Mother's, right? Okay. Anyway, that's a shelf-stable product. So you have to get the moisture down to like 3%. If you don't get the moisture down to 3%, the product, it won't necessarily go bad, but it won't taste good anymore. It'll just get stale and it won't taste good. But dealing with water is one of your biggest things as a food scientist. You got to know what's going on with the water in your system. You have to be a little bit creative. You don't have to be super creative, but we'll talk about creativity in a second. I think there's some really important things about being creative in the food industry. You have to understand fundamental trends and the fundamentals of the science, but you also need to know the grocery store and the fundamental trends that you're watching. You have to be able to assess your competitors. All those things are really important as a food scientist. And if you think about it, there's basically 3 vectors upon which a food scientist works, and they're flavor, texture, and appearance. You know, if you think about all the products out there and the different brands that you see, if you look at how they differentiate themselves, they differentiate on flavor, texture, and appearance, and now nutrition as well. That wasn't so much a big thing back in the past, but in the last 10 years, nutrition is sort of the 4th vector that you can differentiate your products on. If you have any questions, by the way, go ahead and ask them. And I'd like to see everybody. Put your videos on, folks. This is interactive here. If you have any questions, please ask. I'll give you time at the end too, because my part of it won't be that long. I want to talk a little bit about creativity, because people, I think, get the wrong impression about creativity. A lot of people think to themselves, oh, I'm either a creative person or I'm an executor. I either execute projects or else I'm creative. And that's really not helpful in your career. You need to be both. You need to be both creative and you need to be able to execute well in your career. Are most of you guys going to go into the food industry, or are most of you going to go into scholarship? Go into being a teacher of some sort?
Probably the food industry.
Probably the food industry? Most people?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So creativity is something that, you know, it really starts from having fundamental knowledge. A lot of people think, oh, I'm creative. Well, if you need to be creative to build your brand, and say your brand is, you know, Oreo cookies, you really need to understand the equipment. You really need to understand how an Oreo cookie is made. You know, what are the factors that are important to the people in the plants? What are the ingredients? What ingredients are important? You really have to have a deep foundational knowledge of how to make an Oreo in order to understand how to differentiate off that platform. So having a deep foundational knowledge, and the way I would say that is, you know, Henry Ford didn't start out making a Maserati. He started out making a Model T. And we've developed our knowledge of how to do things better over time because we started with foundational knowledge. You also need to be able to take 2 disparate ideas and put them together to make something make sense. A trend that you see out there and your particular brand, whether it's Oreos or Bird's Eye or, you know, Green Giant, or I don't know, any of these Michelinas. What are the trends out there? You know, what are the things that people are interested in? How do I make my product fit some of those trends? And the third piece of that is storytelling. Being able to tell a good story is important to being creative. It's, you know, if you say, I think, you know, Oreo should do X. Why? You know, the people you work with are going to ask you why. You know, what is the reason why that's a good idea? They want you to explain it. So And part of that gets at trustworthiness too. You know, you have to build some trust within your teams if you're ever going to be somebody that they look to for creative ideas. So keep those thoughts in mind. Another thing that I think is really important at the level you're at today, which is, you know, you're trying to build your skills. You're trying to learn how to make food products. You know, what goes into making food products. This is not innate unless you have a grandma like I did that made everything, that was terrific, you know, just a terrific cook. And she was fantastic, and she could do just about anything, and just from scratch. She was great. But you know, unless you've had some of that kind of thing, learn on your own. Make mayonnaise, make a salad dressing, make soup. Soup is a really good thing to learn how to make in order to become a good food scientist. Put together flavors. You know, some of the nutritional issues out there are reducing sugar and fat and salt. You know, put flavors together and try to find things that work. You know, and just do it in you know, have a little night at your apartment or something, and everybody makes something different and shows each other what they're making. And watch those shows, you know, the how to make such and such, how to make Cheez-Its, you know, that's there's some great videos out there that give you a glance at the manufacturing world. And you really need to understand how foods are manufactured on a large scale. That's a key piece of learning that you're going to learn in Dr. Feng's class. It's not going to be on quite the scale of a major food company, but at least on a fairly decent sized scale. See what else. If you know anybody who works at a restaurant, invite them to those parties too. But learning what flavors go together is really good, really important. Okay, so I'm going to cover real quickly some of the my favorite laws of the food industry. The first one being, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. You're not perfect. You're never going to be. Don't be afraid to make a few mistakes out there. But learn from those mistakes. Don't make them again. Try to be, you know, try to be in a learning mode. One thing that they're going to ask you when you interview is, you know, where do you want to be in 5 years? And you should really have a pitch that you feel very confident in about what you want to do in 5 years. For me, it was, and it's not going to be the same for you guys, but for me, it was to always be learning, to be in a position where people came to me for answers, you know, because they knew that I had some semblance of knowledge that they needed, and to be in a leadership role. Those were the three things that I cared about in my career. And that's what I always told people when they asked me that question. But you need to figure out what that is for yourself and be able to talk about that, and why those things turn you on, why they engage you, why that's what you want to be doing in your life. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, but also don't be afraid to ask for help. I think one of the biggest mistakes you make as a young food scientist is trying to be perfect and trying not to ask for help, trying not to get, you know, anybody else to assist you. Most of the folks that have been there a while, wherever you land, they like to teach. They want to help the younger people. They want to help folks out. So don't be afraid to ask people for help. I'm sure you've heard this from many of your classes, but working in teams is really critical. Being able to work in teams is super critical. Trying to build the team and build your relationship with your team members is pretty critical. It's you know, texting isn't going to work. You've got to be able to have one-on-one communication with people, in person, good communication in your teams. They need to rely on you. I had a guy that was really failing because his teammates didn't trust him. They didn't feel like he knew what his job was exactly. And he was really failing. So I had to sit with him and work with him. And we finally got him to the point where now he's one of the best cracker guys in the country, I swear to God. And it wasn't just me working with him, it was several people, but he was a towering intellect. He just didn't have the confidence of his teammates. And you have to build that through, it's not just hard work, it's passionate work. You know, passion is so important. When I first met Dr. Fang, you know, we had this exercise where we had to give this report out. And Dr. Fang gave this report. And he was so passionate about it. And it wasn't very good. And we told him it wasn't very good. And you could just see him. He just was like, oh, you know, it was just crestfallen. But what we understood about Dr. Fang was that he really cared about this stuff. He was very passionate in this class. He wanted to be successful, and he wanted to do his part. And you got to convince people of that for yourselves too. When it comes to working with marketing, there are a few things that I think are really important. First, you know, don't ask me to break the laws of physics. Marketing people tend to ask for the world, and that's okay. They can ask, but you know, you have to get them to understand the difference between the possible and the crazy. And oftentimes they'll ask you for the crazy. And so you have to be able to explain to them and build that trust with them that you know that this is not going to work for X amount of reasons. And that's very difficult to do. Marketing is a very powerful part of the company, and they will push to get their way.
Someone wants to ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead. Katy Perry raised hand.
I was just wondering if you had like any examples of crazy requests from marketing people.
I'm trying to think whether I can talk about this or not. The craziest request I always got from marketing when I worked on the cracker business. I was director of the cracker business, and I worked with them to try to understand what products were in the portfolio coming. And they wanted this cheese product. It was for Cheez-Its. So you guys know Cheez-Its, right? Okay. So that was one of our brands. And it was, they wanted this cheese to be ooey gooey, and yet they wanted it to be inside of a cracker and have it sit on the shelf for 9 months. And there was just no way to do it. They wanted the pictures they had were this ooey gooey, stringy cheese that was coming out. And, you get that maybe for about 4 hours in a cracker. And then, it turns hard. And I just couldn't get them to understand that that's never something that we could execute in the way that they were looking for. It was really hard for them. And after I left that business, they continued to work on it, and they've never been successful, of course, because it's impossible. So there's some things that are just not very doable. And you can always try, you can always give it a shot, but if you can't make it work, you can't make it work. So I always say, don't ask me to break the laws of thermodynamics. The other thing I think that's really important is to plan your work and work your plan. And by the way, any other questions, please feel free. Plan your work and work your plan. Be organized, be proactive. Those things are important, and they build confidence in you from your team members. Here's one that I thought was always really interesting. If, as a business, you say you have a plan or a process, you have a process, but you always go off that process and you never really stick to that process, then you don't really have a process. And people always talk about their process. Here's our process for developing new products and for, differentiating our foods. And, we always, follow this process. Well, if you don't really follow it and there's always an exception, and there's exception here and an exception there, then you don't really have a process. And so I would ask you to think about whether or not the process that they're using is consistent. And quite often it's not. But they'll say it is, but it's not. And that can be a real chaotic environment when it's not. It can be very chaotic for you, for your team, for the marketing folks, for the plants, as you can imagine. So be careful of those things. Never say the words, I don't know. Never say the words, I don't know, to senior management. If you're ever in a room and they're saying, okay, when are we going to have this? Never say, I don't know. If you don't know, then why are you there? If you don't know, why did they hire you? If you don't know, why are you in the position that you're in? So, always say something like, let me get back to you. I can find the answer to that right away, and I will get back to you within 24 hours. Or let me check in with my team. I didn't get an update from them yet on that, but I will, and I'll get back to you within 24 hours. But never say the words, I don't know, because that just sounds like you're bored. You're not there. You're not engaged in the process. Okay. Stay humble. I don't care how many promotions you get, stay humble. Stay humble because your teammates want you to be humble. Your manager wants you to be humble. Your company needs you to be engaged and not feeling like you're above things. Always stay humble.
Olivia, you have a question?
Yes.
I do. So you said that before you became like a principal scientist, you were just starting at the bench. What do you mean by that? Like, what type of tasks did you do?
Good question, Olivia. So I was a bench scientist for about half my career, meaning that I developed products for a line of food products. So I developed food products and built them and tested them in the plants and tested them in my lab and tested them in the plants, passed certain criteria, and those became products that we sold. So I was a bench scientist developing food products. And then the second half of my career, I was in management, and I managed teams that did that same thing. So as you're building your career, you're going to start at the bench. You're not going to start in management. That would be ridiculous. Don't even anticipate that. But once you prove yourself at the bench, you may decide that you want to go into management. You may decide you want to stay at the bench, and both are perfectly fine. For me, as I mentioned, I did want to be in a leadership position. So I wanted to be in a managerial role. But I loved my time at the bench too. That was very good because I was able to build my foundational knowledge and skill sets. That's where you learn your craft, is being a bench scientist and working with your brand teams and working with all of your other technology people, working with the plants, working with the pilot facilities, building those skills that help you understand how to be a good food scientist.
Your first job was at PepsiCo, right?
My first job was at Quaker, which was not part of PepsiCo at that time. Okay. It is now.
Okay. How did you land that job? Or right out of college, like, what did you do to get involved with the company?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I had my own business coming out of getting my PhD. I had a business, and I had a friend who had gone to Quaker Oats. And when I decided to leave my company, I called him up and I said, "Hey, I'm going to leave. Is there anything at Quaker?" And he kind of vouched for me, helped me get an interview, and then I got the job after I interviewed well with them. I also could have gone to Kraft at the time. I just decided the Quaker was a better fit for me. But sometimes it is who you know, Olivia. I'm not going to lie to you. Sometimes, you know, it's helpful to have a friend who can vouch for you a little bit. You know, but I sent out a number of resumes too, and I did get several answers too, and opportunities to interview. You have to be willing to send out a lot of interviews and get a lot of no's, you know, because you're going to get a lot of no's initially. The prime time for you is when you have 3 to 5 years of experience. Why do you think that is? Anybody?
I mean, in the case that you were talking about, like, oh, here's your 5-year plan. You've basically hit, like, you're the end of your 5-year plan. Like, did you get there? And now basically you've got enough experience within the industry that you can either teach or you can become like a senior member that's part of like the next generation, more innovation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good answer. I mean, the main reason why having 3 to 5 years of experience is the prime target of companies seeking new people is because somebody else has trained them. So somebody else spent the time to train them, spent the money. As you say, Christopher, you know, you've learned some things. You've got some stuff under your belt. You've started to, you know, be within your career and start to, you know, hit the ground running and able to understand how to develop your food products. So you've gained some skills. And from a company standpoint, they're like, okay, we don't have to train this guy. This person can come in, they're going to know what they're doing.
So if companies want 3 to 5 years of experience, how do you like expect to get that experience if companies don't want to hire you unless you have that experience?
Well, it's the prime target, but it's not the only target. And you've got to convince them that you are the right person. At the end of the day, they have to fall in love with you. Yeah. They have to say, my business can't go on unless I have this person. This is the person over everybody else that I want in my business. As a manager, I'm looking for people that are going to help build my business, that are going to take stuff off. You know, I got a list a mile long of stuff that I got to get done. Mm-hmm. And I need somebody who can take some of those things off my list and run with them. But you've got to convince them that you are the right person for their company. And each company has a different culture and a different way of doing things and a different modus operandi. That, you know, you're going to fit somebody really well. So you will get a job. If you want a job in the food industry, you'll get a job. You may be working third shift on a beef processing line, but you know what? You can do anything for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And so I always tell kids that first job is the hardest. And it is. That's the hardest one to get. But once you get that, within a couple of years, you know, people are looking for you. So you kind of take anything you can get for that first job. And some of those jobs are tough, but they really help you learn your trade and your craft. So don't be afraid to take one just because it's a tough one, or you have to travel, or you have to, you know, go to some other state, get your experience, and then you can kind of write your own ticket after 3 to 5 years. The last thing I'll talk about is just something that I think is really important, and that is, tell me early and I'm your partner, tell me late and I'm your judge. Now, that comes down to how you work with particularly your manager, but also your teammates. Tell me early if I've got a problem. If you've got a problem, I'm struggling with this part of this problem. If you tell them early, they'll help you with it. But if you tell them late, if you come to them at the last second and say, I just can't do it, I just can't get this thing to work, they're going to be your judge. And so if you're going to have issues on something, try to, don't be afraid to ask questions, ask for help, get some help, talk to your manager, don't sit there for an hour and a half, take 5 minutes. And when you go to your manager with an issue, you should go to him with the issue and how you're going to solve it. Don't ever go to your manager and say, I got a problem, and drop it in his lap or her lap. That is the last thing they want. They got a million things going on. Go there with, here's the problem I'm having, and this is how I think I'm going to approach solving it. Maybe it's going to take you an extra week to get it done or something like that. Or maybe it's going to take an extra few times in the pilot plant to get it figured out. But tell them how you want to solve it. Okay, I've talked enough. What are your questions?
Lipi, I think I have a question for the students, because as I know, the majority of the students in this class, they're right now sophomores, and a lot of them want to pursue the industry as the R&D, specifically for their product development role. So in order to pursue that pathway, do you have any suggestions in terms of that?
Let me just make sure I understand the question. Are you looking for internships, or are you looking to try to work in a particular industry? Tell me a little bit more about the issue.
So it's not the issue. I think when I was talking with the majority of the students in our class, they most of them, because there are a couple pathways, like one pathways go with the quality side, another manufacturing. So most of them want to go with the product development, and basically those roles. And I just want to ask if for that particular career pathway, how to start preparing as a sophomore or freshman student.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so product development in the food science world, product development is the glory job, right? Okay, you want to be a product developer, you want to be somebody who works on a brand, a particular brand, be it Bolthouse beverages or whatever. You want to work on a brand and develop food products that go onto the grocery store shelf. I used to take my mom into the grocery store and show her the products that we were developing that were new that year, back to school, or whether they were coming in the springtime or whatever. And she'd be like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you, son," that type of thing. And that's the glory job in food science, is to develop new food products and be a product developer. But all the other jobs are just as good in many ways. And it just depends on who you are as to how you want to approach that. If you want to be in sales, I had one guy who didn't know, he asked me this question, didn't know what he wanted to do. He ended up in a sales role, and he was so happy. He's done really fabulously well in that sales role. Sales can be great. You can make a lot of money. Doesn't mean you're going to be working as a technologist, though. If you want to be a product developer, make a lot of different foods. Make a bunch of different foods, and tell your interview, when you have that interview, I've made this, I've made that, I've made this. I want to be in product development. I have a passion for it. And by the way, passion is everything in food science. And I don't mean, hey, I'm a hard worker. I mean being engaged in the field, being engaged in the business and what it is that you want to do. So you got to be able to convince that other person that you're passionate about this stuff. If you're going to interview with PepsiCo, you want to talk about your relationship to some of their products. I had my first nachos in 3rd grade, and it was this happened, and I traded for it, and I got these nachos, and it was fantastic. And I was, you got to convince them that you're passionate about their product line. So there's no easy answer to that question, other than really convincing that person on the other side of the table that you're the right person for the job. But I do think you can help yourself by talking about all the different products that you made, whether they be in class or at home or whatever, you know, your relationship with food. I happen to be Italian. My grandma was a great cook. My mom was a great cook. It was, you know, I was able to talk a lot about the foods that I loved and why I loved them. And particularly with Quaker Oats, where I was doing frozen microwavable sandwich items and working with, you know, Italian sandwiches and, you know, different kinds of sandwiches. It was important. It was kind of an important piece of that. They understood that I was pretty committed to the field and that I was pretty passionate about food. So, you know, you may not have that experience, but building your skill sets and building your resume in terms of, you know, the kinds of things you can talk about and in your relationship to food, that's what they're looking for. They want somebody who's really committed. What other questions do you have?
Did you have any internships through college?
I didn't. Back in the Stone Age when I went to college, we didn't have internships actually. I came in from, I got a BS degree in general biology. So I kind of came in from the biology world into the food science world. And there were a couple people who were getting what they called co-ops at the time, like in the engineering department. Some of those kids went and worked for Caterpillar or whatever, but we really didn't have that in the food world so much. Now internships are hugely important, and you know, you're all sophomores. You should be, you know, working on internships. You want to get an internship. They're pretty critical now. Again, you know, submitting your resume, talking to people, convincing them that you really have a passion for this work and that you want to be. Nobody loves to hear more that they want to be at their company than a manager. It's like, oh, I want to be at your company. I want to be an employee of your company. Oh, that's like music to managers' ears. You know, my company? Oh, real? Oh, that's so sweet. So, you know, you got to play the game a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's never easy, but you can have a good career in the food industry. And I'm, you know, I loved my career. I enjoyed it immensely. It's a very different career now than it was then. I think I saw something like most people now will have about 12 different jobs in their careers. So you typically don't stay with one company for 30 years. Even I had four or five companies that I worked for. That was a lot in my time. It wasn't a lot. But it was like, oh, gee, it's kind of been around, you know. But now it's a much more fast-paced, transient kind of situation. And a lot of companies will try you for a little while, and if they don't like you, they'll jettison you and get somebody else. So there are those companies out there. You know, Kraft in my time used to be that company where they would have this new business that they wanted to develop. They'd hire 25 people and then they'd let them all go when the business failed. That was a negative thing back then, but it's sort of how things are done nowadays. So getting fired, by the way, is not nearly what it was when I was coming into the food industry. If you got fired from a food company, I was like, oh my God, no, terrible. It's a real black mark on your record. Not anymore, you know, because companies change, they move along, and that bond is not nearly as intense. But when you find the right company, and it may take 2 or 3 tries, but when you find that right company for you, and they love you, and you know you love them, and you like working on those foods, it's great. It can be really fun, and you become very valuable to them, and they don't want to lose you.
I think Edson, you have a question.
Anybody else got a question?
What is something that often gets overlooked, like in product development, like something that often gets missed?
When you're developing a food product, what's something that always gets missed? The customer. That's the key. Knowing your customer is really important for your brand. You know, if your brand is Special K, they had this sense with Special K that, you know, Special K by itself wasn't enough. You know, they'd done a lot of work with their customers. They've done a lot of focus groups and central location tests. And we can talk about the testing that you do in developing food products. They kind of sensed that there was something missing. And so they put these freeze-dried strawberries into Special K, and it just went nuts. And it was like, and that was because they had a relationship with their customer. They understood what their customer was missing in their current line and what they wanted. And it's sort of that, you know, it's kind of like that, you know, tracking with your customer and finally getting to that point out there where you match up the customer needs with, you know, what technology you can deliver. And boy, that was a big product for Kellogg's. Special K with red berries. Who'd have known, you know, that was going to be a big deal, but it's a big business for them. All they did was put freeze-dried strawberries into a box with Special K. So to your point, Ethan, I think not having that connection with your customer can be a real big problem. There are companies, and you know, there's a lot of different kinds of companies. If you're talking about a big CPG company, consumer goods products company like Kellogg or PepsiCo or Mondelez, or I don't know what a big one out in California is, but if you're talking about those big companies, the folks that make ranch dressing, what's their names?
Hidden Valley.
Yeah, Hidden Valley out there in Oakland. So they're doing a lot of testing with their consumers. So they're doing a lot of, you know, focus groups where marketing will set up these meetings where you're behind that one-way mirror, and you know, there's somebody talking and leading them through a questionnaire, and then people responding, and you kind of take those responses back and think about, you know, what they're looking for and what they're trying to find. I think it's pretty critical to have a good relationship with your customer. I spent a lot of time at focus groups. And then, you know, the other thing you do is do a lot of central location testing. And central location testing is when you have a product and you bring it to a central location and they come to you. So say, you have a central location test at a gymnasium or something, and everybody comes to you and you give them food and they fill out questionnaires. And that's usually kind of you have the focus group and then the central location test, and that gives you kind of an idea of where they're headed. And then the final big test is an in-home use test, IHUT, in-home use test. You have to pass an IHUT in order to launch your product. If you don't pass the IHUT, you got to go back and, you know, start redeveloping it. So there is a lot of testing, but I think the thing that's always missed is the connection with the consumer. Who else has a question?
You had,
Sorry.
Go Ava.
Okay, you were talking about like location testing and stuff, and obviously like with COVID, that's not happening right now.
Right.
Do you think there'll be like any lasting changes from the pandemic that could affect the industry while we're working in it?
I think the biggest lasting changes is that people are starting to realize they don't have to be at a specific location to do their work every day. I think, you know, when I remember when one of the people that worked for me was having a child and she wanted to do a work share program. We set her up and we you know, put her in this work share program with another woman who was great, you know, just as good at her job. And then Kellogg bought us and they were like, None of that. We don't want any of that. You have to be here every day. You have to be on the premises. But it's like, and I think today, had we had the experience of COVID, people would have realized, oh, you only need to be at your workplace about maybe 2 or 3 times a week. You can do a lot of work online. There's a lot of ordering ingredients. You have to build your formulas. You have to get somebody to weigh up those formulas. If it's not you, it might be somebody else. You have to coordinate with your team. There's a lot of stuff that can be done from home. I think that's going to be the biggest change from COVID. Central location testing, yeah, you're probably going to skip central location testing now, for right now. Now, in 6 months, will CLTs come back? Yeah, probably 6 to 8 months. You'll be able to run them again. But right now, your sophomores, by the time you're seniors, I think CLTs will be back.
So you had mentioned something about like reading trends, like that stuff. So just for example, say like you'd worked for Anheuser-Busch at a time, and like with the recent like hard seltzer trend, how do you know whether to say, yes, like this is something like that we could create a product for competition here, or do we like maintain our product line?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Anheuser-Busch almost never is the first to market with something because they're the biggest. They're the big boys. They can just keep pumping out Bud Light, all day long, and everything's great. They're always going to be second or third to market, but they're going to just squash people with their advertising, and they know that, and the people that compete with them know that. So they're going to end up as the number one product in their category, but they're never going to lead with it. So it depends on who you work for. If you work for PepsiCo, PepsiCo is not good at sharing their aisle. They are going to squash anybody that they compete with because they protect their turf like nobody else. And Mondelez is very similar. A lot of companies want to get in, make a splash, and get sold, get bought. Some companies will go in, they'll figure out how to get their products on the shelf, raise some viral noise, and people will be excited about their product for a while, and then they'll get bought up, and the owners leave, and the brand is left. So it just depends on the company that you work for, as to how they approach the marketplace. That didn't answer your question, did it, Chris?
I mean, sort of. I thought it was going to be an answer kind of like that it very much depends on what the company wants to do, but it makes sense.
Well, yeah, if you want me to expound on that, I can. By the way, one thing that I think a lot of young people worry about is, if you work at the bench, do I have to come up with a formula on my own? And I think that's something that scares any young person. It's like, boy, I don't know how to make such and such a product. Do I have to take a blank sheet of paper and start on my own? And the answer is no. Typically, you've got, if you're making a Cheez-It and you're going to make a new flavor of Cheez-It, the Cheez-It part, the cracker is there. You just have to develop a new seasoning, for example. And you work with your supplier base. You say, okay, we have information from our studies and our customers that they want instead of a nacho cheese flavor, they want a Swiss cheese flavor. Help me with, provide me with some samples of Swiss cheese seasoning. So I think maybe 2 times in my career did they say, come up with a brand new recipe for something. And even then I used something else as a starting point and kind of went off of that. So don't be afraid. You're going to have, most companies have brands. Most companies have a brand that they've been making for a long time. They have formulas, and they want some different aspect of that particular formula. Maybe it's a new flavor, maybe it's a new color, maybe it's both. You're going to have something to work with. And most of the time, you're not going to get a really tough project for your first project. They're going to let you build your skill sets a little bit with a relatively easy, straightforward project for your first project. So don't fear that, okay? What other questions do you have?
I have a quick question. So if we wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way we could do that?
Always available at my email address, and Dr. Fang can give it to you. And I'm happy to talk to kids about any aspect of the food industry you want to talk about.
I will send you an email after the lecture with Dr. Mark Lippy's email. Thank you, Dr. Lippy.
Oh, sure. And now it's 3:56. Do you guys have to get off?
Actually, everything is postponed for by 10 minutes. So the class actually started at like 1:10 and finish at 2. So
okay,
that's how it works.
Okay.
I guess we can take it like 1 or 2 more questions.
And for those of you that have to go, you can go ahead and go. But if you want to stay on, I'm happy to answer all questions. Kristen, I haven't heard from you. Tell me, what are you worried about, Kristen?
I'm good. Everybody else asked all my questions.
I'll ask a question.
Okay.
I'm wondering like how important it is, do you think, like to continue your education past your bachelor's degree, like if you want to work in the food industry?
That's an excellent question. That is such an individualistic answer, because some people want to get their BS and they want a job, they want to have a job, they want to have a career, but they also have other things that they want to do too. And so if you want that job, you're typically going to get maybe a quality control job, and that's a fine job, and you can have your career, and you can do whatever else it is that you're interested in doing. Some people want to get further and get a master's degree just to get a little bit further into the science and really understand more about the science, and they want some extra classes, and they want to get that master's degree just to give them a little bit more oomph when they go for that first job. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Some people want to get a PhD because they want to do scholarly work. They want to be a professor at a university, and they want to teach, and they want to do research, and that's fine too. I think, when I look back at, my reasoning for getting a master's and PhD, I really just wanted to get a master's. I was in biology, and I got my bachelor's degree in biology, and that pretty much qualified me to be a gas station attendant or a bartender, or, but I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to work in a biology lab working on a protein receptor site in Drosophila melanogaster. I wanted to do something more hands-on and more where I was going to touch more people. And so food science was great for me, because it was like, my sister came to me, she got a food science degree, a bachelor's, and she worked for 35 years in the food industry in Italy. But she came to me and said, Mark, I found this new area of study, and there's 100% job placement. And I was like, sign me up. This is great. This is fantastic. So I went and talked to the folks that were in the food science department, which was a completely different college than I had been in. And I realized I wanted to go to graduate school. And that's how I got into food science, in a very sort of weird way. But it really just depends. And I got my PhD, I got my master's degree, and there were just no jobs. And so I was like, well, I always wanted to get my PhD, so I'll just keep going. So I just kept going. I was like Forrest Gump, I was out there running. I was just kept going. And I ended up getting my PhD, and then there were jobs. And so that was kind of it. I'd always kind of wanted a PhD. I wasn't really sure why. But the thing about having a PhD is it kind of pigeonholes you too. You know, if you work for a company, they'll go, oh, well, he's got a PhD or she's got a PhD, so we'll give them a hard project. It's like, okay, do I really need that? I don't know. But I typically didn't tell people that I had a PhD. You know, all the people that I worked with, I didn't really like to talk about the PhD. I just had one, and you know, my mom was very proud of me, and that was kind of it. But oh, okay, Katie. So I think it's really individual for everybody as to whether you or not you want to get an advanced degree. I do think that having a master's degree in food science and an MBA is a really powerful combination. So if you want to get into the business side of things, having that technical knowledge and then getting a master's, an MBA, that's a really powerful combination. Does that answer your question, Delaney?
Yeah, so basically it just kind of depends on what you want to do and just like individual.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to do a technical role, you know, getting an advanced degree is a pretty good idea. If you want to be in sales, or maybe if you just want to be in a quality assurance role, you don't need that extra degree. It's nice to have, but you don't need it.
Thank you, Dr. Lippi. And if you have other questions, I will send you his email, and feel free to reach out to him. Dr. Lippi, he likes to talk to young children.
I like to talk in general, as you could probably tell, yes. but I do appreciate that you're all, you know, worried about your career and thinking about your career, and you know, thinking about where you're going to go and how you're going to do it. So you need help, and I'm somebody you can talk to.
Yeah, the students here are really good students, so I'm pretty sure that they will do their well in their future career.
I'm sure they will too. I know they are.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Lippi.
All right, good luck, everybody. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Lippi.